Hey everybody, welcome back to the Edge Report. It's Chris. I've got Michael Tavani with me today. Michael is the CEO of one of my favorite emerging brands in the commercial real estate and future of workplace, Switchyards. Michael, welcome.
What's going on? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. Well, I know that you're a super super busy guy, and I appreciate you taking the time to have a couple 45-minute an hour conversation.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so let's start with you. Give me a quick background. Where you from? Where you living now? What's up?
Yeah. So I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. My parents moved down to Atlanta from kind of the New York, New Jersey area in the late 70s. My dad got transferred for work, and I grew up in a suburb of Atlanta called Dunwoody, which is where my parents actually still live in the house that I grew up in. And so when I was growing up, being Atlanta is kind of I think one of the things that makes Atlanta a great city is most people are from somewhere else. It's kind of a transplant city. But I was the kid that grew up in that city, so it's like wearing the shirt to the concert that you just bought it from. It's not as cool, and so I never loved being from Atlanta when I was growing up because all my friends were from somewhere else. They had moved to Atlanta, and here I am, years later, and I'm still here. So yeah, grew up in Atlanta, and still live in Atlanta. Just in terms of kind of my DNA, so I'm the youngest of three brothers. I have two older brothers. We're all 4 years apart, and I'm the youngest. And I used to like to start talks at one point in time. I had this line that kind of got some head nods, and people would laugh at it, so I used it a bunch, that I was kind of in the entrepreneurial closet for the first like 27 years of my life. I really was kind of just born this way. I was kind of born with this, and I didn't know it. What I didn't even know what that word meant probably until I was, in college. And it certainly wasn't a path that I had seen anyone else do. I don't have any entrepreneurs in the family or anything like that, but I just kind of was always born with this kind of creative side. But it wasn't just like I'm not, I was pretty good at design and brand and stuff like that, but it's not like I was the best in the world at it. But I always just had this kind of wanting to take an idea that lived between my two ears and put it out into the world. And for me, that was the creativity, this notion of having people use it or whatever. So at 27, I kind of found my way, and I had started my first company, which really wasn't a company. It was a website, never made a penny. But that was kind of my first attempt at something. And I really felt like, all right, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I've kind of found it. I'm happy. I'm lucky that I found it. And at 27, I found it. So that's a little bit into me, and I guess what makes me a little bit.
So let's talk about the world of Michael at 27. What year was that? I want to try to frame the technology
Yeah,
of the world that we have.
yeah. So that was 27. That was 2006.
Okay.
Yeah, so I went to college. I majored in journalism and didn't really know what I wanted to do. I thought I was creative, so I thought, I always liked doing film and video stuff. So I thought maybe, do I want to be a filmmaker? Do I want to make documentary films? That's kind of maybe what I thought. If you and I were talking while I was in college, maybe I thought that's what I wanted to do. But when I graduated college, the advice that I got from my dad, and my dad's given me a ton of great kind of worldly advice over the years, but not everyone's perfect, right? His advice was a few years out of college was when I had some kind of unfulfilling jobs. I wasn't super happy with what I was doing professionally, and I almost had this angst of like, there's something out there, but I don't quite know what it is. His advice was just go get a job at a big company because you'll be able to experience. Of course, knowing me now, this was like the worst advice of all time. But the advice was like, you at a big company, you'll be exposed to marketing, to sales, to product, to technology, and maybe you'll figure out which of those interest you. And a big company will have all of that. And so, anyway, that was the advice at 27. But I did, after college, I ended up going to law school, which also, when you get to know me, you'd realize, whoa, that's not at all what that doesn't seem like you at all. But it was kind of an opportunity for me. I mean, I viewed it as an opportunity to spend 3 years while I was quote unquote in law school. I mean, I was in law school, but really what I was doing during that time was honing in. So this was 2004 to 2007. I was really figuring out what I wanted to do someday. And so it took an expensive and tough law degree to go get to figure out that's not what I want to do. But I think there's this kind of entrepreneurial seed that I do want to chase. So This was probably during the period of, there was the dot-com boom, which I really just missed. I was kind of in college for that, but I wish I was like in the working force, kind of starting things at that point. But I had just missed that, but saw it and was exposed to it a little bit. And then this was kind of a second wave where I think you did have a bunch of companies that we all know now. I forget the examples, but there was kind of this wave. I think YouTube and et cetera came out maybe during this like second wave, kind of 2005 period. But if we look back at it now, it was still, I mean, you had no iPhone, you had no mobile. I mean, it was a much different world. And one thing that I would say is there's never a perfect time. Like, I think if you were 22 now, you might say, oh, I'm coming in late. Screw that. The best time to start something is like tomorrow, or today. I don't think there's ever a great time. So anyway, that's during that time period, 2007.
Yeah, that's great framework, because that was back when people thought the internet wasn't going to work. 99 was my first dive into URLs. I was part of the domain folks that were buying and selling.
Same
So I
with
was
me.
flipping real estate, digital virtual real estate in the 90s, late 90s. I sold my first company some technology, some software technology that we had, to art.com. And we were in the art business. We'll get into that some other times, modernizing today's artwork. And basically what we were doing was we were like sort of on the digital forefront of the JPEG, and galleries, like as simple as galleries are now. Those were breakthroughs for artists back in the day. I was right on that precipice of people having medium format slides that they were presenting for their MFAs, to go get their Masters of Fine Art, sending in these boxes of digital analog format slides. And I'm thinking to myself, man, there's got to be a future to like images on the
Yep.
internet. So anyway, we've come a long way, and that's kind of like where I hear things now that aren't going to work, or this emergent technology or that emergent technology. This stuff's been around for a long time. So
Yep.
awesome framing. I went to college at Charleston, so we
Okay.
probably crossed paths. You were at Georgia, is that right?
Yeah, I went to Georgia. Yeah, and College of Charleston was where I actually I only applied to two schools. That was the other school I applied to. I
Yeah.
loved it there. I
So it's
loved
funny. It's funny because the only place we ever left to go from Charleston was to Athens, because music.
it. Yep. Yep.
So there was no reason for us to leave the beach. And all of my friends that I grew up with were Alpharetta, Marietta. I came from Connecticut, so
Where you grew up in Connecticut?
I was the token Yankee too, right?
Yeah.
In the early '90s in Charleston, where people didn't know what to do with me.
Yeah.
So it was awesome for me to learn the social dynamic between being from a very liberal Democratic
Yep.
blue state and moving to a very conservative Republican red state
Yep.
at the ripe old age of 18 or 19 years
Interesting.
old. So it really sort of set me on this path of independence politically.
Yep.
But I also understood what it was like to have to be a chameleon, because I was way out over my ski tips in
Yep.
a red conservative area.
Interesting.
College was liberal arts college. It was still creative. It was still artsy. So anyway, yeah, thanks for framing that. Let's, what's Switchyards? What is the Switchyards thing?
Switchyards. I'm going to spend the rest of this conversation describing what Switchyards is. I've thought the most in the world of anyone about Switchyards, and it still takes me a while to describe it. I'm actually gonna. I have in the background of my computer. I have something pulled up, and I'm gonna read it. And that's gonna describe Switchyards, and then I'll kind of talk through what I just said. All right. Switchyards. We've combined our favorite parts of working out of a coffee shop, a college library, and a sexy boutique hotel lobby, all under one roof in the country's best residential neighborhoods where people actually live and want to be. It's open 24/7, and the cost is more like a gym membership. So it's convenient, it's always open, and you have a key to go whenever you want. So that's kind of something that our creative director at Switchyards and him and I go back and forth all the time on how do you socialize Switchyards? How do you describe this thing? So that's the high level of what Switchyards is. The reason why the words are tough to come by, frankly, for Switchyards is we're creating something new. It's not, we're not curing cancer. It's not rocket science, but there are no analogs in the past for what we're doing. We've taken things that we're inspired by in the world and that everyone knows, things like coffee shops, things like hotel lobbies, things like libraries, and we've kind of smashed them together and put our own spin on it. Of course, in a moment in time, that's changing, right? Like our big, if I had to make the bull case for Switchyards, it's that there's 1 to 3 days a week that's newly up for grabs in terms of how people are spending their time from a work perspective. And ultimately, that's the space that Switchyards is playing in. But it takes a little bit of dream weaving of like, we're combining a few of these things. Of course, if I could walk everyone listening or watching this right now into a Switchyards and walk them around for 2 minutes, and of course you've been to one, but if I could walk them around for 2 minutes, they'd be like, I get it. But it's hard to describe that using words, right? Because it's different, it's new. So we created this category that we call the neighborhood work club. And so we use this line a lot. We're the world's first neighborhood work club. Like, it's new. A neighborhood work and club are 3 words that everyone knows what they mean. We smashed them together. It's a mouthful. It's 3 kind of, it's a long 3 words. Neighborhood's a long word. But generally people understand what it is once they kind of come in. So that's what we're creating. And, it's been 10 years. I've been working on Switchyards for 10 years to kind of get it to this point. And now we're feeling good about where the product is and what its place in the world is and what problem we're solving and how we go out and get new members and all that kind of stuff. But it's taken, it's been a journey to get to this point.
Yeah, it has. And I appreciate you taking the time to enunciate that, because so much of season 2 is about emergence. And a lot of season 2 here at the Edge Report is about finding your words and literacy, because words matter. And the words that we used to have that describe work, words that we used to have that describe living, are different than the words that we have now. You mentioned that I'm a member. I'm working on my passport, Michael. I've been to, I think, 6 or 7 clubs now.
You've been in, I know you went to Nashville. You went to Asheville too, right?
I've been to, so the 2 I missed in Nashville were Berry Hill and Sylvan Park.
Okay.
So I went to East Hill, Eastwood, and Germantown because I was on the east side checking out the neighborhood, because my residential project that I'm working on, Pathway Communities, is very similar in terms of the site selection process of the demographics. So the east side of Nashville was amazing. Asheville was where I posted up Post and Lean. I was on boots on the ground on September 27th at our family farm in southwestern Virginia. I saw a lot of death and destruction during that storm, and changed my course of my sort of North Star, my compass, so to speak, to really kind of create a better housing situation for people. That's a whole different story. But I posted up in Asheville for a good bit because the Asheville location was spared, even though it was super close to the River District and very close to some crazy destruction. And I've been down to the Greenville location where you and I really crossed paths. And I don't even know if you remember this. We did the core and shell renovation for Six Summit Capital at the Belmont location.
Yep, I do.
We helped save that building. And
what an unbelievable building.
Yeah, and I that's one of the projects that I'm most proud of. Is 6,600 square feet, right, in a tiny little neighborhood community outside of Charlotte. But still, it's that facade grant that the city gave us, the fact that it has historical relevance, the fact that you guys are in there making it something different that's an amenity to the neighborhood, speaks to urban planning. It just sort of gets my tail wagging. So I'm a huge fan, and I will continue to evangelize the brand because it suits me completely. I'm home today, but I spend half of my time at Oakhurst, the other half of my time at Belmont during the week.
Yep.
So love what you're doing.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it. And I appreciate all your support over I guess how I first interacted with you was when we opened up in Charlotte. So I appreciate all your support over the year plus.
Yeah, and KC, coming soon, Kansas City, Denver, Charlotte, or Charleston, sorry.
Yep.
Let's talk about your growth a little bit. I've heard some rumors that there's hundreds of locations potentially on the map.
Yeah. So we actually, speaking of Charleston, your college town, we just announced the neighborhood today. So yeah, we have 21 clubs that are open right now across 5 cities in the Southeast. So started in Atlanta, and I could, let's at some point go through a little bit of how Switchyards got here and some of the iterations, because it overlaps with a lot of the stuff that you and I like. But just to catch you up on where we're at now and how we're thinking about growth and how we're thinking about this business. So yeah, 21 locations, 5 cities. We talked about a lot of the cities. But really, we've spent the last few years just getting this thing dialed in so that we can do what we're kind of doing right now and what we're about to do. And so in April. So as we're recording this in mid-March of 2025, in April of 2025, we're opening the 3 clubs in 3 different parts of the country. So Denver, which will by far be the furthest away from our kind of base, our headquarters. So expanding outside the Southeast into Denver in a neighborhood called Lohi, which we're super excited about. And that opens in early April. Then mid-April is Kansas City in a neighborhood called Crossroads. And then Charleston in late April. So 3 different parts of the country. So those will be the next 3. That'll be 22, 23, and 24 clubs for us. And then we have more coming. So we like to kind of tease out these announcements, but we're looking almost across the country, not fully. We're not looking in the Pacific Northwest yet. We're not looking in like the Northeast yet, but we're definitely looking, far and wide for great. Really what we look for is great neighborhoods, like iconic residential neighborhoods, not necessarily central business districts. The flip on our real estate model versus a lot of national brands that have scaled in lots of different industries is, if we were like a retail brand, we would go into a city and look for like the hottest kind of like retail areas, right? So just as an example, if we were going into Nashville and we were a retail brand, you might look at something like 12 South, right? It's like, oh, that's where a lot of national brands are. I mean, a lot of my favorite brands, like, if they have one location in Nashville, that's where it might be. We're not a retail, and 12 South's a great neighborhood, but we're looking for, where do people who live, like, what are the most iconic residential neighborhoods where people really are truly living, spending time, not shopping, but truly spending time as residents and hanging out at coffee shops and restaurants, etc. So that's a little bit of a flip. And there's not a ton. I mean, there's some brands, but there's not a ton of brands nationally that we can even look at that are going into the same types of kind of neighborhoods and buildings that we're kind of creating our own real estate strategy, which we like to do. We like to create our own path. That's what makes it fun. So we're kind of figuring out that path and creating it as we go along. But yeah, big plans. We'll get to almost 40 locations total at the end of this year, at the end of 2025. So we have an aggressive year planned and aggressive years ahead planned. So a lot of work to do. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
Cool. Yeah, on the real estate side of things, I think I was looking at some of our shared connections. LG in Atlanta, awesome guy. Dave Payne, awesome guy.
Yeah.
Patrick Braswell, awesome guy. So it's interesting. The world is really small. When pre-COVID, when I was running my company, we were doing basically tenant upfits. We've done work in 48 cities around the country. So our connection, our broker network connection is pretty big. And site selection was always our strategic operative, right? We were always 15 minutes outside of town against traffic near the airport in a suburban office park. Like, we knew exactly what we were doing for our portfolio analytics. And I can see that coming out of what you're doing. And it's such a cool thing because you're doing 2 things simultaneously. You're creating a new use case for the assets and you're creating a new amenity for the neighborhood. And that's why I love the concept of Switchyards, because to me, the future of work is just work. We all have to do it, right? Mm-hmm. Some of it sucks, some of it doesn't suck. A lot of us are doing 2 or 3 or 4 things at once. There's a lot of solopreneurs. There's a ton of people that have been laid off. So, when I go into a Switchyards, I just feel the creative energy from people. It's the opposite of what we used to put on the market. It's the opposite of cubicles and rows and management and hierarchy. And it's like open 24/7, freedom, flexibility, and great Wi-Fi, awesome coffee, like come as you are.
Yep.
So kudos to you there. Did you mention that you announced the Charleston neighborhood location, or are you waiting to do that?
No, we announced it today. I don't remember if I mentioned that. So yeah, that I've probably left that out. Yeah, so we're going into a neighborhood right next to Hampton Park, and in a former neighborhood grocery store. We love the buildings that we're going into. We love the life, and by the way, former neighborhood grocery store, that's Belmont in Charlotte, right? And so, yeah, so we love kind of the things that we followed, the work that we followed. But yeah, that's where we're going in Charleston. And so the next 3 that I just mentioned, the buildings, all 3 of them are just like amazing buildings for us in terms of history, age. I mean, the one in Kansas City in Crossroads is like a former steel foundry. The one in Denver has this, bow truss kind of, barrel roof, that kind of has that wooden arched roof. Former like kind of a mid-century neighborhood grocery store in Charleston, in kind of in the middle of the neighborhood. So yeah, these are three great neighborhoods and great buildings. And ultimately, like, we want people, like, when we're announcing like the first location in a Charleston or in a Denver, Kansas City, like, oh yeah, that neighborhood is perfect. So our flagship, it wasn't our first ever Switchyards, but kind of our flagship Atlanta location is a neighborhood called Cabbagetown. And and then our first one in Nashville is a neighborhood called, East Nashville, Eastwood specifically, but East Nashville. And so it's just kind of that creative energy, that grit, that energy, you kind of know it when you feel it type of thing. That's what we're trying to capture, especially as the first one. Now, in Atlanta, where we have 12 locations, I mean, we're in lots of different neighborhoods. We're in the suburbs. We're in, we're in, like, right now, I'm in our downtown Switchyard. So, but generally, that first neighborhood, we want to really nail it in terms of capturing the essence of, like, who really is going to understand Switchyards, and then you kind of branch off.
Yeah, and it's so important too, because it's like the stuff that you can't force or build in office, right? Like in Greenville, the bank vault. You don't just find a bank vault in the
Yeah.
middle of a space, or whatever it might be. Like when we did the core and shell in Belmont, the stucco walls that are the way they are, and the floor is as gnarly as it is, and
Yeah.
like those textures are not things that can be reproduced. So it gives that evocation, it gives that feeling, that's just a different experience than an office, and that's what people are looking for. It's that umami, so to speak.
Yep. Yep. And we're actually, we kind of, I think someone described, I mean, we're in a way looking for, like, the real estate in a great neighborhood, but the actual space that has, like, the most hair on it. In a way, for us, that's a good thing. Like that, we've been in the spaces before that are in really cool buildings, but they've been just painted over, and they've been, like, drywalled over, and they've kind of lost all that. We actually like weird corners, weird nooks, weird walls, weird wires coming out of walls. All that stuff is good. We're going to leave all that. We want it there. You kind of, like you say, they don't build buildings like that anymore, so we're embracing all that. But I think for certain types, that's built into our design. I think for, if you're an office or if you're a restaurant or whatever, you might say, hey, we want to do our own thing there, and that's not going to play into it. So we're looking for some of the gnarliest stuff, which ends up being sometimes real estate that the landlord can't get rid of. Like, they can't, who's going to move into this? It's weird, it's funky, it's different. I mean, because you've been to Eastwood in Nashville, right? So it's one of our most special spaces. It's in, like, the sanctuary of this, like, 1928 Baptist church in the middle of the neighborhood. And think about, like, who could have gone into that space. It's a funky space, right? I mean, just in terms of, like, how do you use all that? So we made these little offices, we made those libraries, and, like, we made these little, almost looked like, it wasn't a Catholic church, but almost these confessional rooms. We made those phone booths, and you got like the stage, and it's just like and so it's like we made all this stuff. It worked, and it made it funky and weird for us, but who would have gone into that? A really creative, maybe, agency might have said, hey, we'll embrace this, but it's a lot of funkiness there. And I'm sure it's a super cool space, and obviously a great neighborhood, but I'm sure the landlord was like, hey, this is going to be a very particular kind of buyer of this, lease, of this space.
Yeah, definitely. But I think that that's part of, again, getting back to the season 2 emergence and the changing of assets. Use cases are changing too. And, the hardest part of entrepreneurship in commercial real estate is the entrepreneurial side of it with underwriting. Because if you can't point to it and say it's this, then the money tends to get pretty risk averse. So it takes creative, patient capital to build something that is an experience that doesn't exist. And it's one of my sort of fascinations, and part of the reason that the Edge Report is called the Edge Report, from bricks to clicks. The idea is that we're going to the edge to try to find these repositioned assets. We're trying to find these new emerging concepts. And Switchyard embodies that. When you look at it, when you take a church and you put 40 or 50 souls in there at one given time, the energy inside changes. It's different. Then you've got the whole creative, the stores underneath that are in the basement of that church that are also equally creative. Then you have a whole use case for residential behind it. So that's why I went there first, was because looking at that whole block inside of that neighborhood, inside of that city, inside of that state, inside of the Southeast,
Yep.
I was like, oh, I got to see this firsthand.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it does so much. You've got work, live, play, freedom, flexibility, opportunity, connection, digital equity, diversity. It's all right there in that block.
Yep.
And I think you guys really do a good job synthesizing that, because I think if you take Switchyard out of that church, I'm not really sure that block even performs the same way it does. So I see that whole asset allocation changing as a result.
Yep. I'm out of, I spent a lot of time thinking about initially with Switchyards on the first one years ago, because so this is our office, this is our headquarters. It was the first Switchyards in downtown Atlanta. And I actually bought the building and went through the process of buying a building built in 1928, 100-year-old building, and kind of trying to, and that's a lot of lessons, a lot of hard-earned lessons of, but I used to spend a lot of time earlier in the V1 of Switchyards. So I kind of describe Switchyards as kind of V1 and V2. V1 was like the first 5 years, and this one downtown Atlanta building, and figuring out the use case and trying and growing into it and learning a lot of unique insights. And then kind of V2 is the neighborhood work club. That's the version of it that But anyway, just learned a lot in terms of what is space. And I came at it, and I think you'll appreciate this. I came at Switchyards as almost with the end use case in mind. I'm not a real estate developer. I'm not a commercial real estate person. I'm not a real estate investor or anything like that. I had this really strong point of view on the end use case. I wanted to start and operate that business and put that thing into the world, really because I wanted it myself. I wanted to be a consumer of that. And I'll never forget this. It was one of like these seminal turning moments for me. One of my childhood friends came to the original first Switchyards, the one I'm in right now. This is in like 2017, probably 2017, 18, somewhere around there. And we were operating kind of a different type of business, but it was Switchyards. It was kind of it was like a startup workspace. And we never called it co-working, but if you were lazy, you could call it co-working. And he comes here, and he's like, you guys bought this down and out old downtown building with no parking. And he's a commercial real estate guy, and he's been doing it for 20 years. And he's like, do you realize you might be getting the most per square footage rents in the entire city? He's like, you don't know what you're doing, in terms of like commercial real estate, but you might be getting the highest because you have so many people here in a dense way, and you bought this building so cheap, and you kind of created your own use case that this is like the best, I don't know what terms he was using. It was like cost per square foot or revenue per square foot or whatever. He's like, you might be getting the best in the whole city. And you have like pros, you have like massive firms that are trying to, and you're doing it in like a small way. And for me, that was a turning point of, what I'm good at and what Switchyards is good at? We're good at weaving the dream, telling stories, and getting people to a space. But it's not about the building. It's not, it happens to be this old, cool building, but it's not like the most epic building in Atlanta. In fact, it was a down and out building. It's what's going on inside the four walls of that building is why people are here and why people are paying some kind of membership or whatever. And that was a moment for me where I'm like, I think we did something. I think I did something here that could be applied to something much bigger. And I didn't even quite realize that that's what I was doing.
You did. You definitely did. And let's double click on that for a minute, just so that the listeners can kind of understand how the membership agreement works. And, how do you guys go and find a building and rent it and then make money and give the members an experience, without giving your secret sauce. I've done your math. I figure it out, but help them to understand.
Switchyards is in a way, just to use like an analogy that's pretty easy for everyone to understand, is it's like a gym membership. They go find space, They rent it out. They put in equipment, machines, etc., treadmills and bikes and all kinds of stuff. And they do whatever their programming is, and they sell memberships. And that's the business has been around. Obviously, we're doing something very different. It's a different moment in time. It's a different customer. But that's essentially what Switchyards is from a business perspective, from a model perspective. And of course, the times changed a lot, and if you think about, let's just take the gym for 1 second. There was a moment in time, probably 50 years ago, where people didn't join. There weren't even gyms. I don't know when the first gym started in like America, but there was, I know for a fact, I've talked to my parents about this. They weren't members of a gym in like the 20s, or in their 20s. And so at some point in time, first off, there was a fitness movement, and, probably in the 70s around jogging and exercise and getting in shape and fitness, et cetera. So that had to come. And then it was equipment that had to evolve, like treadmills, et cetera, bikes and stuff like that. And then it became a point in time where it's like, someone said, hey, I could rent this space out for X, and I can put in that equipment, which is probably why they started, is it was too expensive for people to buy that stuff at home. And or the variety at home was never going to be as much as, so maybe, I don't know, in the 80s, I'm making all this up, but maybe in the 80s, you could buy something like a treadmill or an exercise bike, but it was probably expensive, and you definitely weren't going to buy two of them. And so it was like a gym was like, hey, we're going to have all that in one space, and you're just going to pay a monthly membership. And so again, I think there's some similar dynamics to Switchyards there. And of course, the big difference is this complete disruption of work has happened. And it was happening. Switchyards launched before COVID. So we put out the Neighborhood Work Club 10 years. Well, Switchyards opened 10 years ago, but the Neighborhood Work Club we launched in 2019 before COVID, about 6 months before COVID. And the thinking was, because of the first version of Switchyards is, whoa, people are working in like a different way. And when I say people are working in a different way, it was the early adopters of the new type of work, who was hanging out at the first version of Switchyards from 2016. We opened Switchyards in 2016. So from 2016 to like 2019, when we then launched the Neighborhood Work Club, who was hanging out at Switchyards were kind of startup founders. And so those are early adopters. Like, those are people that don't have a set style of work, and they're starting companies, and they're freelancers and designers and whatever. And so I was seeing a new type of work emerge, and we tried to create a product ultimately for where we thought, what's the famous Wayne Gretzky quote, like, skate to where the puck's going. We were trying to see around the corner, and we were kind of seeing around the corner. We had like this unfair advantage in that I was operating a co-working space effectively in 2016 through 2019, and I was working in it every day. And so we were seeing what the next version of work might look like. And that's what became the Neighborhood Work Club. And then, of course, COVID kind of poured gasoline on the use case, or it accelerated, I guess. It accelerated this use case, which was already happening. You think about, I'm talking to you, we're not in the same city right now, and I'm talking to you through technology and through a laptop computer, and I have another computer that fits in my pocket. And so just think about, I think I heard this quote on a podcast during COVID, and it really struck me. It was just said so simply. And the quote was like, I really think our kids they're going to ask questions about the fact that we used to go to a place and work, knowledge workers, and work for 40 hours a week. Like, we used to, drive, in a city like Charlotte or Atlanta, sit in a bunch of traffic, drive to an office, historically, 30 minutes of traffic, then get to an office, open up our laptop, work all day, close it, and go home. And I think our kids that's going to sound about as outdated as a phone booth or a newspaper or whatever. It's just going to sound like, that's crazy. Why did you do that? Right? When you have devices and technology, et cetera, when you don't have to do that. So work historically happened. I'm going too deep here, but I'll stop talking in a second. But work historically happened in one place. And that was a relic probably of the Industrial Revolution, where work actually had to happen in one place because that's where the machinery was. Like, how else were you going to make the widget unless you went to the place where the machinery was? Well, then knowledge work, you know, kind of followed that same suit that like, hey, where does work happen in the office? Maybe that's where the few central computers were, or maybe that's where the knowledge was. Is that well, I started a company before Switchyards, a tech company, tech startup, and we had raised money, we had an office, and this is just 15 years ago that we were going to an office every day. Like we were only hiring people that lived in Atlanta, all knowledge work. It was all, I mean, we developed an app and we were going to the office every day. There was no notion of like, maybe people don't come to the office every day. It was like, this is where we work. And we were a pretty hip, forward thinking company. So you could only imagine, legacy companies, just bigger companies. That's what they did, right? And so I had a unique insight into where things were going by operating effectively a co-working space. We called it a startup hub. We were doing something different, but I was in it every day, and something was changing. And then COVID accelerated it a decade plus into the future. So I almost was gifted a pair of glasses looking a few years into the future. And I was being really thoughtful about what's happening here and what's going on, and that's kind of how we got here. That's kind of what I was seeing.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I want to recap that because I have an image in my head that I think Hinman will like. I see Olivia Newton-John standing next to Richard Simmons, somehow mixing together that 80s exercise vibe with all that curly hair, and those tight leotards, dancing around, and then thinking about like that was the future of exercise back in the day. And that's really probably early days of where we are with what we're doing now. I just call it the future of life. I have a 15 and 17-year-old, so I've been given a couple of sets of glasses throughout my career, and they're in no place do they see an identity where they commute into a central business district to do their work,
Yep.
and they have all of their devices, and the work that they do is this. So we're talking about people, platform, and place. The way we work, how we work is this way. So it is not tied anymore to that row of cubicles with a manager over our shoulder. And it does make sense for certain types of processes and certain types of companies, and companies that support critical infrastructure. You see so much of this conversation around return to office and Jamie Dimon and, the capital markets folks and commercial real estate people, these titans and tycoons. Like, yeah, they're pretty heavily invested in real estate. So, like, it makes total sense that that would be a perspective that they would have. But, like, that's not really who we're talking about here. That's not really the member profile of Switchyards. That's 25 years of being a co-founder of multiple companies, more exits and failures than entries and successes in my career. We're talking about giving people flexibility and autonomy around their own agency. And that's what, 24/7, 365 access with a single subscription, a single membership that allows me access to 21 places. Like, yeah, that's it. That's what I need to be successful. That's what I need to work. I need a conference room when I need it. I can book it online. When I don't use it, I don't use it. But man, look, I'm telling you, don't raise your prices. But I drink $100 worth of coffee a month, and
I love it. And by the way, I love that. That's
and everybody that I bring into that space, I try to sell them a membership because I just think that we're better with that, with more community and more opportunity to bump into each other. What you're selling there really is that opportunity for things that they're trying to contrive in the workplace, and that's that serendipity, that's the water cooler moment, that's the collaboration, getting together, that's the community. And like, let's talk about the hot wing, man. Like putting out a newspaper, the community is really starting to grow now, and you guys are really coming into your stride just now with Switchyards. This is my feedback to you. Like when you start connecting people, man, it's going to get good.
yeah. And we are in the first inning of that because almost every employee of Switchyards first I will go grab coffee with them, first week or second week or whatever. And almost everyone's feedback will be, wanting to do more events and programming, et cetera. That's kind of the common thing. And what I think people don't realize is we've had to be, as a startup, you have to be focused. Otherwise because you're gonna die unless you don't die. And so you better make sure you don't die. And so we've had to be so focused on just becoming world class at creating the neighborhood work club, the thing, the space. It's so hard to do. And this is not an app. This is not a SaaS product. We have physical, we're in, right now, I mean, we just shipped stuff from Atlanta to Denver. We have 2 trucks going, and so this is physical bricks and mortar. And so we've had to be really ruthlessly focused, saying no to so many good ideas around the stuff that you're talking about so that we can deliver the promise that we think we can do on the product. And then, only then, Brandon, our creative director, who you mentioned, he talks about this all the time, that, hey, he's like, Michael, you said years ago that once we get to this point, that's where we're going to lean into it. And we're starting to get to that point now. So yeah, I mean, we only are just starting on that front. There's so much opportunity there, because the notion of being in a place like ultimately an escape from the house or the office or something is what's bringing everyone to these clubs, these work clubs. And you might bump into someone you knew from a long time ago, a neighbor, someone, whoever, a former coworker. And so that's kind of the platform, that's the foundation. But then what do you layer on top of that? And there's, we have a ton of ideas, lots of things that we're kind of thoughtfully pursuing, but we are only just getting started. Yeah, I mean, what you're referencing was kind of a fun thing for us, of nostalgia, to actually put out this thing that we call Club Paper, which is kind of a quarterly tabloid, we're calling it, and just as the beginning innings of connecting people. But there's so much more to come, and we certainly have pretty ambitious goals there, while we're continuing to, like, the most important thing is creating an amazing utility to people, where people feel like, I can't get this anywhere else. That's the most important thing that we're focused on. And then how else can we layer on what that future looks like? And everyone has different motivations. I mean, I'm the type of person, I love working at coffee shops, but ultimately, when I go to coffee shops, I'm not necessarily looking to bump into people. I just like the energy of being around people, but actually being kind of introverted in a place around a lot of other humans, And that's kind of what I do at Switchyards. But everyone has their own thing. Everyone has their own way to use it. And I think we've tried to design it such that you can get whatever you want out of it. But a lot more to come on that front.
Yeah, it's very intentional. Again, having I think in our portfolio total, I've probably been a part of maybe 6 million square feet of activation between all the different types: retail, industrial, warehouse, office being our primary. And you can feel the intentionality of the activity based design for sure. But it reminds me of this story that I kind of have to tell. This guy by the name of Varesh Bhatia, he was somebody that I was fortunate enough to have met early in my career when I was working on. Long story, we'll save that. But anyway, Varesh was from Chicago, and he went to school at Northwestern. It was early computer science days, data science days, and he actually, along with one of his partners, created the first GPS for his dissertation. So it was really just simply like, how do I get there quickest? It sounds so simple now; it's rudimentary. And what happened was, a website was a brand new concept, but he was going to create his presentation on a website so that he could present his GPS findings to his class through his dissertation on a website. And the only website template that they had 3 different sort of fields in the template. And the first one was definitely, spatial. The second one was definitely GPS point by point. And this third one, it was this empty field that he couldn't figure out. Like, he had to put some bullshit in it, basically. Well, when he was installing all of this application onto the computer back then, this was 1987, 92, I think it was. It was like he had like 18 disks, like 1 of 18, 2 of 18, 3 of 18. And what he realized was that, like, getting out of work, you remember that, progressive installation. Well, he, on that third spot, he just called it install shield, because this whole manual process of putting in 1 through 18 in succession of disks of information, well, he created install shield accidentally. as a result of creating the first GPS. So what's interesting about, kind of what you're doing here is that you get that opportunity to see in the future. The umami, the value is yet to be determined. I have a hunch that it's in the community,
Yep.
but you are absolutely right, because Brendan Henry told me the exact same thing a year ago. He's like, bro, we are dead focused, laser focused on the clubs.
Yep.
And I'm of the same mindset as an entrepreneur with creative thinking and a lot of energy. I'm like, man, you wait till you put your community together, because community and connection and people and purpose is what every company is trying to put together right now. And you're
Yep.
building it one club at a time.
Community, you'll find this funny or interesting. Community, the word community was actually one of our like bad words that we, because in the early days, not that we don't like community, it was that it was one of these overused by lots of companies, by lots of startups, but under delivered kind of thing. And it was an easy to use word, but not a lot of people delivered it. And so in the early days, we're not, and I've seen tons of startups die trying to create community first, and but didn't even really have, anything. And so we realized early on, we're going to get world class, because we used to do in the original first Switchyards that opened pre-COVID, we used to do a ton of programming, which was, community. And we did some really killer programming, getting speakers and talks and having people, mix and all that kind of stuff. But we realized as we were launching the Neighborhood Work Club that we're going to have to get laser focused on being the best in the world at something. And we felt that like that something was this Neighborhood Work Club. And then at some point in time, it'll be much easier to layer on quote unquote community on top of that, once we have created this like utility that we're, and frankly, beachhead or wedge or whatever you want to call it, which is the neighborhood clubhouse, right? Like, so when we open in Hampton Park in Charleston, and in Crossroads in Kansas City, and in Belmont and Charlotte, and all these different neighborhoods, now you have this kind of wedge in to like, what do you want to do with that? So anyway, that's been the strategy, and I think it's a constant. We're still saying no to lots of different things, but starting to say yes to a couple of things that make sense. So anyway, trying to be really thoughtful and intentional there.
Well, you need to be, and I applaud you for it, because it's, to me, again, season 2 is about emergence, right? When you sow too many seeds and you bring in all this cultivation, all this opportunity, and there's
Yeah,
too much, and you don't know what you've got, your yield cut, all of a sudden you're your own farmer's market.
yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
it's really hard to specialize once you've done that.
Yep,
So
yep,
I always say, if Eric Church, I'm an Eric Church fan, especially that song "Kill a Word," and I agree. The words that have been overused, community is probably number one. Sustainability is the first one. When I hear, I'm like, okay, we have that one's got to go, because so many things of what we're doing, we're not sustaining,
yeah, yeah.
without getting too political.
Yeah. Here's another word that in my world that is overused, and it almost doesn't mean anything anymore, because it's co-working.
Mhm.
We've never, Switchyards has never used the word co-working before. And by the way, it's fine. It's a fine word. It's actually a decent word if you think about it. But it's, co-working's 15 years old, maybe, the modern kind of co-working that we all know. And of course, most people probably think about WeWork, maybe industrious. But yet people will call Switchyards co-working. We don't call ourselves that, but people will call ourselves that because there's no words to attach to it. And if you think about like and again, there's no beef around this. It's just, it's two different things. That's why we're trying to create, and we are creating a new category. And, our belief is 5 or 10 years from now, after some very sweaty work, people will be like, oh, you mean like a neighborhood work club like Switchyards? But co-working is one of these terms that, again, if you think about a central business district, glass high-rise building co-working space, and then you think about any version of Switchyards that you've seen, those couldn't be more different than each other. The only shared thing is that work happens to be, one commonality that's happening at both things. But other than that, they couldn't be. The design, the space, the price point, the point of view, everything about it is different. We don't have office spaces. We don't have desks, like permanent desks that people are, dedicated desk, any of that stuff. But, that's kind of the vernacular that we know. So
Yeah.
That's how these walls get broken down over time.
Well, and so much of my professional networking group is that, right? So it is the desk passes and the breathers and the liquid space and the convenes and the industriouses. Like those are all friends of mine. All
Yep.
those
Yep.
people. Jackie Bruno, for example, right? She's our community manager. She's an ex-We worker. So
Yep.
it's like that's the coolest thing about the evolution of what's happening here and the emergence of Switchyards, I think, is that it's really moving into something more meaningful. And you're not going to get, I would imagine, your business model is not surrounded on a Fortune 50 company coming to you and saying, hey, Michael, I love what you're doing. I need, I got 500 people and I would love to grab some space and maybe you can work out the deal with the landlord and I'll pay you.
Yep.
That's just not what you guys do.
Yep.
So that's awesome. Well, we're getting close to the end. I have to ask you a question. I categorize all of these. I'll give you 3 words. Choose one. Maverick, Maestro, or Misfit? Which one do you best or most identify with? A Maverick, a Maestro, or a Misfit?
Misfit. Misfit stands out the most to me. Yeah, I think when you are just, I think in creating something that doesn't exist, putting it out into the world, I think there's a chip on your shoulder. There's a no one sees this, but I see it. There's a, I have to do my own thing here. Like it's, like the world doesn't see it. I think that's the one that speaks to me the most. And I just think probably definitely my whole entrepreneurial life, the last 15 years of my life, that's probably what it's felt most synonymous with. It just feels like, you're playing a different game and no one's kind of playing the same game. And that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. And by the way, the Misfits always throw the best parties. So, at least I've come to find one of the ideas that we have around here for the Edge Report is to take all the like-minded groups and have
What
a
are the other
discussion.
two? Misfit, Maverick, and what?
Maestro.
Maestro. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what I get such a wide array of answers to that question because people automatically go into self-identification, and I very much
That's
fit
a
that.
good question. I like that question. I've never
I
been.
very much fit that misfit too. Don't tread on me. I'm trying to play chess. A lot of people are playing checkers. I'm trying to solve problems. I didn't know that I was going to have to refer to you as Esquire. I learned something new, that you have a law degree. So what a different world that you've come from between your communication side, which I think you're definitely using. But listen, man, thank you for taking the time today. This was a lot of fun. I got a lot of respect for what you guys are doing. I think it's amazing. I will continue to evangelize the brand. I'll probably put inappropriate classified ads into the hot wing,
For sure.
or something just to keep that going because I really did enjoy that. And I love that, every once in a while I come in and there's just something different there. So, keep doing what you're doing. I'm really, really enjoying it.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate you also seeing it. I think better than most, you kind of see what we're doing, appreciate it, see where we're going. And so yeah, I always appreciate people that have taken notice and are kind of noticing what we're doing. Obviously, we're working hard to try to create something. Like I tell people a lot, just to wrap it up, is I tell people all the time that for me, the way I get the biggest satisfaction in the world doing this is people using this thing and loving it. This is a much more than a job for me. I don't even think of this as a job at all. I think of this as, this kind of art form that me and a lot of other people have put out into the world. And so, I love nothing more than a text message or a LinkedIn post or whatever it is saying, I just love using this thing and I'm getting a ton of value out of it and I love every part of it because, that's what we're spending our lives doing, putting something into the world that makes you feel something. And I think the worst thing, what we're fighting is apathy, where people don't care at all about the thing that we're building. So I appreciate you noticing and recognizing and appreciating.
Love what you do, and you'll never work a single day in your life, Michael.
Yep, that's right. I buy that.
Well, thanks for your time, man. For sure, I'm going to have you back. We'll figure out what season 3 is. I will bump into you at a club for certain. Look me up when you're in Charlotte. We'll grab a cold one.
Yep, sounds good, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, bub.